My name is Yasmin Hernandez, and for my final project, I'm working on propaganda during World War I. So I chose propaganda because I feel that propaganda is very important, especially to historians, because it gives a much broader picture of history. And the images in itself give a lot more sentiment, a lot more feeling. They tell a lot more about the society during the time. So for my sixth decade assignment, I chose a propaganda that originates from Australia. So, Australia during World War I was a British colony. And because this was a world war, many of the British colonies were very involved in this war. So, Australia was involved. And at first, many of these Australian, especially young men, were very eager to join the war. So many people were volunteering to join the war effort that they even had to start denying people because of just the high volume of people that were going to volunteer. A lot of these young men, especially, were searching for a sort of sense of adventure, and what better than to join a war? However, this eagerness, this zeal to join the war was not exactly spread out evenly throughout all of Australia. So, Australia was divided between those of British descent, the people who saw Britain as the motherland, that saw Britain as their savior, that were loyal to the British crown. They were eager to join the war effort, to fight this war, not only for the Australians, not only for themselves, but for Britain, for their motherland. And on the other side of the spectrum were Australians of Irish descent. And these people did not see Britain as the motherland, they saw Ireland as their motherland. And at the time, there was very harsh British brutalities in Ireland, and because of this, Australians of Irish descent were not a fan of Britain. They did not want to fight this war for Britain, especially because of how just brutal they were with Ireland. And so this is what created a big divide between those that were for conscription and those that were against conscription, with Irish descendants in particular being very anti conscription. Also, we see that in Gallipoli, which was a failed military attempt, was just devastating. It just killed morale for Australians and New Zealanders. And so, just this brought on a lot of anti conscription sentiment. So, when it came time for whether conscription were to be passed or not passed, a lot of pro conscription propaganda and a lot of anti conscription propaganda was popping up. And so for this particular assignment, I chose an anti conscription propaganda because I feel that this image in itself tells a lot about the sentiment and how these people felt conscription would impact them. So the image I chose is this one. And so I want to begin by analyzing this image by pointing out this man that is sitting down. So this man is depicted as a large man that is sitting, and the fact that he's sitting denotes that he's lazy or that he's sitting out this war, that he's sending these Australians out to fight the war for him. He is not out there, he is not suffering, he is not having to live in these horrible conditions to fight this awful war. He's out there, he's not having to basically carry this burden that is the war. He is sitting comfortably, sending out these men to fight for him. He is not having to suffer in any kind of way. Also, we see this gun with the word conscription on it. And this goes with the fact that guns are what kill people. And with the word conscription labeled on this gun, this is basically saying that conscription is what are killing these men. Not only the men on the opposing side, but these Australian men. That initially, if conscription were to pass, conscription is going to be the death of these men. Also, we see in this image on the backs of ammunition the words single men. So at this time, those that were pro conscription were developing these propaganda posters that were targeting married men in specific. So this is a pro-conscription propaganda, which reads, Australian nationalists, married men are exempt if the government proposals are carried, but if they are rejected, all will have to go. So they are trying to appeal to these married men by saying that, hey, you know what, if conscription passes, you don't have to fight this war. You get to stay home, you get to stay with your wife, to stay with your kids. So this anti-conscription propaganda is targeting exactly that. It's saying that if conscription were to pass, hey, it's these single men that are going to be sent out. They're going to be the ones that are going to be dying. They're going to be the ones that are going to be having to fight this war, to carry this burden. It's going to be them that are going to have to pay the price of this. And finally, we see this box with even more ammunition with the words, who next? So this shows that these men were seen as just numbers. After all, the common theme of World War I was that this was a war of attrition. Whoever has more in the end will be the winner. So they did not care how many men died. Their lives essentially had no meaning. As you can see, this man is just shooting out all of these men because, hey, he has a box right there with many more. He does not care about these lives because he has many more rolling in. He'll have many more coming. And essentially what this propaganda poster is saying, that if conscription were to pass, these lives would mean even less because they would know that they have this resource base to pull from. If these men were to die on the field, they know that conscription will force more men to join the war effort, essentially devaluing these men's lives. And so I feel that this propaganda image in particular is very strong, very emotional, gives so much of sentiment, so much of what these Australians were feeling at the time, feeling that their lives had no meaning, that they were fighting a war that was not for their own cause. And I feel that this is a theme that can also be seen in the 6th decade, especially when it comes to Vietnam. As we know, Vietnam was just a disaster. These men were being sent out to fight this war, this semi-proxy war that it got to a point where Americans on the home front just were not sure what the objective of this war was, what was the end game. No one really knew. And many Australians felt the same way, especially those of Irish descent. They were fighting this war and no one really knew for what. And this wasn't just in Australia. Many people at this time felt this. Many thought that World War I was going to be a short war. Many thought that World War I was going to be like previous wars. Many expected to go out into an open field and to shoot the other opposing men, and this war just did not come out as they expected. They ended up having to fight a long war, a trench war, and just many of these men ended up losing morale because they did not know what they were going to be confronting when they entered this war, especially these Australian men that entered the war with such eagerness. Many people, by the ending years of the war, were not sure what this war was even being fought over anymore. And so I feel that propaganda highly resonates throughout the 20th century. Many people are very open to saying how they feel about the government and how they feel about the government's actions. And I feel that this theme is even prevalent to this day. It's clear that citizens are willing to act out against the government, to speak up about inequalities or anything that they see as unfair or even pointless. I mean, we saw that some Australians were anti-conscription, and even in Vietnam, many Americans were unclear about what the objective was for the war. So this propaganda against the government is not unfamiliar to this day. For example, it's no secret that many people are against Trump. They do not support Trump. They're very openly hating him, saying many things about him. And while propaganda isn't a popular tool to this day, social media is. And they use these platforms to communicate with other people, to express their ideas, to take stances against what they think is unfair, what they think is unjust, unlawful. And they use these platforms to spread news, to spread information, to communicate with others, to try to convince others of their viewpoints. And it's very clear how important propaganda is, not only in the 20th century, but even to this day, although it's in a different shape or form. But propaganda is very important and it's very influential. And it's clear just how important and influential it is because in the case of Australia, there was 2 attempts to pass conscription laws and both attempts failed, and therefore Australia never had conscription. So it's clear just how powerful this propaganda was. And that is why I chose to write about and talk about propaganda for not only this assignment but my final project.